Well, despite a pullback today, cryptocurrencies and crypto-related stocks have had a bull run, notching record highs and receiving increasing institutional adoption.
The World Bank just dropped the bomb, and honestly, most people don't even realize the size of the crater this thing just left in the global financial system. Like, you blink, you scroll Twitter, you check your favorite influencer talking about some meme coin, and boom, the actual future of money gets written into policy while retail is distracted chasing hype. That's the reality right now. The World Bank didn't just whisper, didn't just float some abstract idea. They literally spelled out the rails of the new system, and those rails have names: Ripple, Stellar, XRP, XLM. If you're holding those tokens, you are not just early, you are basically sitting inside the cockpit of the next financial system while the rest of the world is still boarding the wrong train. And listen, I know it sounds dramatic, but think about it. The World Bank is not some influencer, not some YouTube channel trying to farm clicks, not even some random government official testing pilot projects in isolation. No, this is the World Bank. When they speak, central banks listen. When they speak, developing nations don't just listen, they move. And what they just said in black and white is that the current system is outdated, inefficient, broken, and more importantly, being replaced. Not maybe, not someday, not 5 years from now we'll explore blockchain. No, they said it's already happening. And the models they name-dropped are Ripple and Stellar. That's not me hyping you up. That's the literal blueprint. Ripple and Stellar aren't just projects anymore. They're the scaffolding for the financial reset that's unfolding in real time. And here's the part that makes 2025 so wild, because now we're seeing the pilots flip into policies. Like, let's not forget that in 2023 and 2024, everyone was talking about Ripple's SEC case. Oh, will XRP be declared a security? Will the US strangle it? Will regulators kill innovation? And then what happened? Ripple fought tooth and nail, dragged it out for years, and by mid-2024, clarity started coming in. Now, in 2025, Ripple is not hiding in the shadows anymore. It's not begging for recognition. It's sitting at the table. It's literally embedded inside IMF task forces, BIS pilot corridors, and CBDC frameworks from Asia to Latin America. And Stellar? Man, Stellar is the humanitarian backbone right now. You saw what happened in Ukraine when they pushed USDC aid directly to wallets that could be cashed out instantly. You saw Kenya, Colombia, even refugee corridors in the Middle East. But here's the kicker in 2025. Stellar is no longer just proof-of-concept aid rails. It's now a backbone for UNDP's larger humanitarian finance agenda. They're rolling out scalable payment corridors in Africa and South America that are literally Stellar-powered. And the World Bank just nodded and said, yep, this is the model. So if you're out here thinking, oh, maybe Solana pumps, maybe some new AI coin pumps, you're missing the plot. You're missing the tectonic plates shifting beneath your feet. Because this isn't about hype cycles. This is infrastructure. This is the plumbing of the next 100 years of finance. And XRP, XLM, they're not guesses anymore. They're not gambles. They are the pipes being welded into the monetary grid. Now let me get messy here, because this isn't some clean TED Talk with bullet points. This is me literally shaking you by the shoulders and saying, do you understand what just happened? The World Bank basically told every central bank, stop wasting time, stop trying to reinvent the wheel, stop pretending like you're going to build your own custom magic blockchain from scratch. Use what works. Use Ripple. Use Stellar. Plug into ISO 20022. Build CBDCs that are interoperable from day one. That's the message. And when the World Bank writes it, the IMF backs it, and the BIS tests it, it's not an idea, it's law in motion. People think the flip moment is going to be gradual. Like, oh, we'll see XRP climb slowly, XLM slowly grind up as corridors open. Nah, that's not how inelastic demand works. Look at oil. Look at commodities. When the world suddenly needs one finite thing and there's no substitute, the repricing is violent. It's not like, oh nice, 10% pump. It's like, overnight, double, triple, fivefold, because now it's not speculation, it's necessity. And XRP, XLM, they're literally coded into necessity. You think cross-border payments are going away? No, they're exploding. You think remittances slow down? No, they increase. You think humanitarian aid stops flowing? No, it multiplies as the climate crisis and conflicts expand. Guess what's sitting in the middle of all that value transfer? Ripple rails, Stellar rails. Guess what fuels those rails? XRP and XLM. And I can already hear the skeptics. Oh, but what about Ethereum? What about Bitcoin? What about central banks building their own coins? Let me answer you straight. Bitcoin is a store of value. Great. This gold 2.0. Nobody's denying that. But nobody is using Bitcoin to settle $50 million cross-border CBDC corridors in under 3 seconds with compliance built in. Ethereum? Amazing smart contract playground. But are governments trusting Ethereum with national currency issuance? No, because Ethereum doesn't give them compliance at the protocol layer. It doesn't give them KYC, AML, privacy toggles. Ripple does. Stellar does. That's the difference. That's why the World Bank name-dropped them, not ETH, not SOL, not Doge. Because those other chains might be fun, but they're not policy grade. And let's talk BRICS, because in 2025, that's another bomb people aren't processing. BRICS has been openly talking about a shared settlement currency. Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, they're not hiding it anymore. And what infrastructure are they testing in the background? Cross-border CBDC platforms that need neutral liquidity bridges. You think they're going to rely on US-controlled SWIFT for that? No way. They're already experimenting with Ripple corridors. They're already studying Stellar rails. Why? Because they're neutral, because they're ISO 20022 compliant, because they plug into the system without forcing anyone to kneel to Washington or Brussels. And if BRICS goes live with a CBDC corridor in 2025, guess who's in the middle? And I swear, the retail market still doesn't get it. Everyone's out there chasing whatever memecoin is trending on TikTok, arguing about ETH ETFs or Solana outages, while the literal backbone of the global financial reset is sitting under their nose. XRP and XLM aren't flashy. They don't need influencers. They don't need hype. They have the World Bank, the IMF, the BIS, the UN. They have central banks running pilots in secret and then suddenly announcing, oh, by the way, we've been testing RippleNet for 2 years. That's the level we're talking about. Here's the wildest part. 2025 is the year ISO 20022 messaging fully takes over globally. SWIFT already flipped its big migration deadline. Fedwire in the US is running it. Europe's Target 2 is live. Asia is aligning. 11,000 banks worldwide are speaking the same digital language now. And which tokens natively align with that? XRP XLM. It's like having the Rosetta Stone while everyone else is still drawing stick figures. That's why this isn't just crypto adoption. It's systemic integration. And don't get me wrong, price is still quiet. I know you're staring at the chart like, hey, why isn't XRP $10 already? Why isn't XLM $5 already? I'll tell you why. Because price is the last thing to move in an infrastructure shift. First come the partnerships, then the pilots, then the compliance, then the corridors, and only then does demand suddenly flip the switch. That's why it feels dead silent now. That's why people think, oh, maybe it failed. No, the silence is strategic. The accumulation is invisible. The rails are live. And when it all flips, it will look like an overnight miracle, but it was years in the making. You know, people laughed at me a few years back when I said the World Bank, the IMF, the BIS, all these institutions that pretend they move slow and bureaucratic, they already had their eyes on Ripple and Stellar. Back then, folks thought this was some conspiracy theory cooked up on crypto Twitter. But now it's 2025, and guess what? The evidence is slapping us right in the face. These networks, XRP Ledger and Stellar Lumens, they're not just fringe experiments anymore. They're literally being positioned as the rails for this so-called new financial order. And you can see it plain as day if you just stop scrolling memes and actually look at the documents. I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. The World Bank itself published materials where Ripple and Stellar were listed right there under settlement options. That's not a theory, that's their own words. And now, years later, you've got CBDC pilots running in Africa, in Asia, in the Caribbean. And when you look at the infrastructure, surprise, surprise, it's often Ripple or Stellar under the hood. Nigeria tried their eNaira rollout. Didn't go so smooth at first, but guess what? They're now in talks about upgrading their rails. And the whispers are that they're leaning toward ISO 20022 aligned systems. Who's been ready for that standard for years? Ripple and Stellar. See, people make the mistake of thinking crypto adoption is about memes and hype coins. Nah, the real adoption was always going to come from the plumbing, from the boring, invisible rails that move trillions quietly every single day. That's why banks laughed at Bitcoin, because they knew it was never going to move institutional money at scale. But Ripple and Stellar? They fit into the pipes. They don't scream revolution, they whisper integration. That's why regulators are more comfortable with them now. And that's why you've got the World Bank and IMF not just talking, but actually collaborating with these networks in pilots. And let's be real, 2025 is the year where this stuff isn't just theory anymore. Ripple beat the SEC. That case that dragged for years, that made people doubt if XRP would even survive, it's over. They paid a fine, they adjusted their US sales strategy. But the asset itself? Not a security. That clarity opened the floodgates. Suddenly, banks in the US that were sitting on the sidelines are now quietly testing corridors. Mexico to the US? Latin America to Asia? You think that's random? No, that's RippleNet plus XRP as a bridge. And Stellar, don't sleep on Stellar, because while Ripple went corporate, Stellar went humanitarian. They teamed up with the UN, with NGOs, to actually deliver aid payments directly to people's phones. You had Ukrainian refugees in 2022 and 2023 already receiving digital aid in USDC over Stellar. Now in 2025, you've got pilot programs in Latin America and Africa using Stellar to distribute microloans, subsidies, remittances, all instantly, all at near zero cost. You think that's some experiment? That's the playbook. Governments are watching, and they're saying, why build clunky CBDC rails from scratch when Stellar already works? But here's the kicker, and I want you to really let this sink in. The entire financial world is upgrading to ISO 20022. By 2025, it's not optional. SWIFT has moved. Central banks are aligned. That's trillions of dollars in payments every single day now moving on a standard that Ripple and Stellar were designed to plug into years ago. It's like they had the blueprint before anyone else even saw the map. And now all these banks and central banks are scrambling, and oh look, here's Ripple with their on-demand liquidity, here's Stellar with their anchors and USDC partnerships, ready to go. You think that's a coincidence? No, that's positioning. People keep asking, but will the price go up? Will XRP hit $10? Will XLM hit $5? And I tell them you're asking the wrong question. Stop thinking like a gambler, start thinking like an architect. If the rails of the new system are being built on these assets, then the value isn't just in the speculation, it's in the integration. Every corridor opened, every CBDC that plugs in, every remittance that flows through, that's utility. And utility at scale doesn't ask permission. It just grows. And here's something else, the BRICS nations. Everyone thought BRICS was just political noise, but in 2023, they openly started talking about building alternatives to SWIFT. Now, in 2025, Russia's already piloting a cross-border settlement system using blockchain. India's RBI is knee-deep in CBDC pilots. China's ECNY is already live in dozens of cities. Guess what the bridge asset discussion circles back to? Interoperability. And that's where Ripple and Stellar shine. They don't replace national currencies. They bridge them. They don't fight central banks, they give them tools. That's why the World Bank mentions them. That's why BIS writes reports on them. They're not outsiders anymore. They're the plumbing of the insiders. So yeah, call it a conspiracy if you want, but when the World Bank's own PDFs have Ripple and Stellar logos sitting there, when BIS reports list XRP as an example of an efficient settlement token, when NGOs are literally delivering aid through Stellar wallets, is it still a conspiracy? Or is it just people refusing to accept the new reality? I'll say it plain. The financial reset is not coming. It's already happening. And Ripple and Stellar are sitting right in the middle of it. 2025 isn't the start, it's the acceleration. And I know some people are still sitting there like, well, okay, but if this is all happening, why isn't XRP already $1,000? Why isn't XLM making millionaires overnight? And that's the mindset that keeps people broke, honestly. Because they expect this switch to flip overnight, like one day we're in the old system and the next day suddenly everyone's using blockchain rails. That's not how financial infrastructure works. This is the boring, gradual, behind-the-scenes shift. The public won't even notice until it's already normal. That's the trick. Look at how the internet rolled out. In the 90s, people thought email was a nerd hobby. By the early 2000s, you couldn't live without it. Payments are going the same way. Most people don't care how their money moves. They don't care if it's RippleNet or Stellar Anchors or ISO 20022 or whatever. They just want instant, cheap, and safe. But the institutions care because they're the ones saving billions in settlement costs. They're the ones reducing friction in remittances. They're the ones who can't afford to keep running on COBOL mainframes from the 1970s while fintech eats their lunch. So what do? They adopt Ripple. They adopt Stellar. Quietly. No hype cycle. No fireworks. Just integration after integration until it's everywhere. And we're seeing it right now in 2025. Banks in Brazil testing real-time corridors to Europe through Ripple. The National Bank of Kazakhstan extending their CBDC pilot with Stellar Rails. The EU, after dragging their feet for years, finally admitting that private sector solutions are faster than their bureaucratic experiments. Even the US, slow, cautious, resistant US, now has FedNow live, and they're openly talking about how to bridge FedNow to international corridors. Who's in those conversations? Ripple. Stellar. That's not my speculation. That's public information if you know where to look. Now, let's talk about stablecoins for a second, because this is the part that makes people's heads spin. Everyone thought stablecoins were just Tether and Circle fighting it out. But here's the twist. In 2025, governments themselves are now issuing tokenized deposits and wholesale CBDCs, but they're not building new pipes for every experiment. They're piggybacking on existing rails. USDC on Stellar is one of the most widely used stablecoin corridors in Africa right now. People literally use it as digital dollars because it's faster and cheaper than anything else. And on Ripple's side, you've got central banks working on wholesale settlement using XRP as the bridge, not just theory but live pilots. Do you get how massive this is? It's not about crypto bros anymore. It's about the re-engineering of money itself. You've got Visa and MasterCard running stablecoin settlement trials. You've got PayPal pushing PYUSD. You've got banks issuing tokenized deposits. And yet, Ripple and Stellar are the connective tissue. They're not competing with all these projects. They're linking them. That's why they're valuable. That's why the World Bank flagged them years ago. Because they're the neutral layer. They're not a threat to sovereign money. They're the bridge that makes sovereign money actually work in a digital world. And if you still think this is hype, let me remind you of the SEC case. That case wasn't just about Ripple. That case was about whether the US was going to completely crush blockchain innovation or finally give clarity. And now that it's resolved, the floodgates are open. Institutional money doesn't move without regulatory clarity. Now it's got clarity. So do you think the banks are just going to ignore it? No chance. They're going to use it. They're already using it. They're just not screaming it from the rooftops because they don't want retail investors front-running them. Meanwhile, Stellar has carved out this niche that's genius. Because while Ripple went top-down, working with banks, Stellar went bottom-up, working with the unbanked. And now those two paths are meeting in the middle. Governments look at Stellar's track record, aid payments, refugee assistance, remittance corridors, and they say, this works. Then they look at Ripple's track record, settlement speed, liquidity management, institutional partnerships, and they say, this scales. Put the two together and you've got the blueprint for a global monetary reset. Not some sci-fi theory, but actual rails already in motion. And here's where it gets even crazier. AI. Everyone's been hyping AI in 2024 and 2025. And yeah, it's impressive, but here's what nobody's connecting. AI needs instant settlement. Machine-to-machine payments don't work if you're waiting 3 days for Swift. You think autonomous systems are going to send a wire transfer? No. They need microtransactions, instant finality, low fees. And what rails provide that? XRP Ledger, Stellar. Both are already experimenting with AI-driven payment systems. That's the future nobody's ready for, but it's coming fast. So when people roll their eyes and say, oh, another crypto pump, another hype cycle, I just laugh, because the truth is most of crypto will die. 99% of tokens are distractions. But the ones solving real problems, the ones banks and governments are literally building on, those are the ones that survive. And XRP, XLM, they're not just surviving, they're embedding themselves into the DNA of the new system. Now, if you want to get really crazy, let's throw AI and IoT back into the mix. Because here's the kicker, machines are about to start paying each other. Electric cars paying charging stations. Smart meters paying for energy on demand. Devices paying for API calls. You think they're going to use clunky Visa rails for that? No way. They need instant, automated, programmable payments. That's blockchain. That's Stellar. That's XRP Ledger. And it's already in motion. So when someone asks me, well, do you really think the World Bank cares about crypto? I laugh. Because the World Bank doesn't care about your meme coin. The IMF doesn't care about your favorite DeFi farm. But they absolutely care about the rails that move money across borders. And they've already told us in their own words that Ripple and Stellar are part of their toolkit. They put it in black and white years ago, and now in 2025, we're just watching them roll it out in real time. So yeah, call it messy, call it hype, call it conspiracy. But facts don't lie. Ripple and Stellar were built for this moment. And this moment is here. And let me just say this straight, if you're still doubting, if you're still waiting for some CNBC anchor to spell it out for you, you're already behind. Because the truth is, this reset doesn't need your permission, it doesn't need your belief, it's already happening with or without you. Ripple didn't wait for retail to catch up. Stellar didn't wait for crypto Twitter to clap for them. They went straight to the institutions, to the NGOs, to the policymakers. That's why the World Bank mentioned them years ago. That's why the BIS pilots look suspiciously like RippleNet corridors and Stellar aid rails. People think adoption is going to be loud, with big announcements and fireworks. Wrong. Adoption is quiet. It's boring memos, technical upgrades, partnerships signed in boardrooms you'll never step into. And then one day, boom, you wake up and realize your paycheck, your remittance, your welfare check, your cross-border payment, it's all flowing over these rails. By the time the crowd sees it, the system's already live. That's what 2025 is showing us. Quiet integration, loud consequences. Ripple and Stellar? They're not the future anymore. They're the present. So let me wrap this up the only way that makes sense. Straight, no filter. The World Bank already dropped the bomb, the fuse is lit, and XRP and XLM are standing right in the middle of the blast radius. We're not talking theory, we're not talking speculation, we're talking active rails, tested corridors, central banks already moving value under the radar. And the retail crowd? Still asleep, still chasing meme coins, still arguing about ETFs and TikTok rumors. Meanwhile, the real money is being hardwired into RippleNet, into Stellar rails, into ISO 20022 systems that don't care about your emotions, they care about settlement finality. And this is where you've got to make a decision. Because there won't be a press release saying, hey everyone, the switch just flipped. It'll happen quietly like a software update, and then the entire financial grid will be different. The price action won't be some slow crawl. It'll be violent, sudden, and irreversible. That's what happens when you go from speculative liquidity to systemic liquidity. That's what happens when tokens stop being investments and start being the grease inside trillion-dollar machinery. XRP and XLM aren't hype coins, they're pipes. So what's the play? Position yourself before the lights flicker. Stop looking for permission from mainstream media. Follow the institutions, follow the pilots, follow the corridors. 2025 is not the year of speculation. It's the year of activation. Ripple's platform is already shaping CBDCs. Stellar's aid rails are already saving lives in conflict zones. And the World Bank didn't just acknowledge them. It practically handed them the blueprint for the new system. That's as loud as it gets. If you believe in this reset, don't just sit on the sidelines. Stay informed, double down on research, cut through the noise, and position yourself with conviction. Subscribe, turn on notifications, share this with people who are still blind to what's unfolding. Because the next 12 months aren't going to be gradual, they're going to be explosive. You're not just holding coins, you're holding programmable liquidity, tokenized infrastructure, the literal keys to the next financial era. And when the world finally wakes up, you won't be early anymore.